Hey there, community bankers. Welcome back to the Correspondent Podcast from Independent Correspondent Bankers Bank. I'm your host, Madison Kaplinger, Marketing Specialist for ICBB. March is Women's History Month, and at ICBB, we've declared it Women in Banking Month. While we've come to see more and more women represented at every level in banking, there's still plenty of room to grow and challenges women often face to their career growth. I sat down with Natalie Bartholomew, the voice behind the Girl Banker brand, to talk about how women can build their careers, navigate challenges, and professionally advocate for themselves and other women. Please welcome Natalie to the podcast. Hey there, community bankers. I am here with Natalie Bartholomew of the Girl Banker. How are you doing today, Natalie?
I am good. I am doing great. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for coming on. I've been excited about this podcast for a while.
Good. I'm glad. I hope I can meet your expectations.
I'm not worried about that. So you start your podcast by having guests tell their girl banker story. So what is yours?
Sure. I grew up knowing that I wanted to be a banker, which is kind of unique. There's not a lot of little girls that play bank, probably when they're young. I had the influence, though, of my grandfather, who was a banker, a local banker in the town where I grew up. He was there for 45 years. And so I grew up going in and seeing him there. And, that was back in the day where everything was done with a handshake. They had real bankers hours, and I think they were open from like 9 to 3, and then they closed in the middle of the day for lunch and fun things like that. So banking's changed a lot since then. But the ladies at the bank would send send home some banking tickets, and so they were like loan deposit tickets, all those different things. And I had no idea what they were, but I would make my twin sister play bank with me, and so it was just something I always knew I wanted to do, and had the opportunity to be on a junior bank board whenever I was in high school, and so had even more influence of what career in banking looked like, and kind of learned at a young age to advocate for myself in terms of when I had the opportunity to talk to them about wanting to work there, even though it was just as a part-time teller. That was a great opportunity to let them know what my career aspirations were. And I was grateful that they were able to create an opportunity for me. So I started as a part-time teller when I was 18 years old, at a competitor bank here in town, and worked my way up through college and graduate school, and did all kinds of things, everything from teller to customer service, to what is now considered a CSR role. Back then, we called it a deposit counselor. So opened new accounts and things of that nature. I'd always been told that if you wanted to have a good career in banking, that you needed to have knowledge on the loan side. And so I was able to work as a loan assistant and in loan operations. And then when I graduated from graduate school, a loan position was created for me. So I was doing both all of the above. This was before things were heavily regulated to where you couldn't do all the things, but I did commercial, consumer, and mortgage lending, and I was the in-house credit analyst. So I kind of learned through drinking through a fire hose, but got to do all those things. And so I worked at that bank for 12 years and attended graduate school of banking in year 12 in Colorado, and had the opportunity to just meet lots of great bankers. And at that point in time, I was really kind of questioning. This was after being in banking for 12 years. I was in my hometown. And, to be transparent, when you're in your hometown and you're making loans to people that you went to high school with, or that people that went to high school with your parents, it kind of creates awkward situations. And I was really questioning, is this what I was truly meant to be? I'd been so focused on a career in banking. And so I'd even started taking praxis tests to be a high school finance teacher. And so going to graduate school of banking was really a turning point in my career, because going there made me realize that banking is definitely what I wanted to do. I was just kind of maybe made for more and ready for more. And so as the stars would have it, they aligned, and I was introduced to someone that connected me to another role when I switched banks after being at the other one for 12 years. and started kind of my little, I call it my dog leg in my banking career journey, to do bank marketing, and really fell in love with bank marketing, and did that for several years. So I am now at First Community Bank in Northwest Arkansas. First Community Bank's been in Arkansas since 1997, but I helped start our market here in Northwest Arkansas. And in just a couple of weeks, I will start year 24 of banking, which is crazy. I always like to say that I started when I was 12, but I serve as community president for First Community Bank in Northwest Arkansas, and feel that, my background in doing all the different things. I served as a chief marketing officer at one point, a chief operations officer at one point, and having just that full background in all the different roles has really just prepped me for this position that I'm in now. And this is truly my end game. I've never been so certain of anything in all my life, and love the team that I work with, and just very, very grateful every day to get to come and do this at First Community Bank.
Wow, there is so much that I love about your story, from the fact that you knew so young that you wanted to be a banker. I don't talk to a lot of intentional bankers. I talk to a lot of accidental bankers.
Yes, yes, I bet you do. And it's funny you say that, because when I get to speak at specifically at women in banking conferences, one of the first questions I ask the audience is that how many of you in the audience knew that you wanted to be a banker when you were little? Because there's really not anyone out there telling young girls that, hey, you can be a banker. And so there's not a lot of young girls going around saying that. And so usually when I ask that question, there are very few women that raise their hand, very few. But then when I say, just like you said, unintentional or accidental, I say, raise your hand if banking found you. And that's when usually the majority of the hands go up. So you're exactly right. Most of us are accidental.
Yes, and I have, asked the same question and, seen the same phenomenon, across banking, and across like conferences that I've been at. So you started the Girl Banker platform. Is it 5 years ago now?
It was in 2017. So
17.
I know, I don't know about you, but the last 5 years in the 2020s seem kind of like a blur. So
Yes.
yeah, it's been a few years, and it's crazy to think that. But yes, 2017.
Yes. So what inspired you to start the Girl Banker platform, and what was the moment you kind of knew it was making an impact?
Great question. So leading up to 2017, first and foremost, there were a lot of things going on culturally in our country. The Me Too movement was going on. There was definitely a new focus on women in leadership and what that looked like. And I had kind of realized at that time, there was just kind of something stirring in me, I guess, that there was a need for a voice and advocacy for women in banking, because there really wasn't at that time. Very few women have leadership roles, specifically CEO levels, in banking. And I have a very dear friend, Allison Twiggs Dyer, who had always been telling me, you should consider writing a blog or doing something along those lines. And I always thought, there's really nothing I have that's that exciting that would be worth putting in a blog. So what do I have to say that anyone would want to read about? I'm just a working mom trying to figure that out, trying to deal with mom guilt and all those things. And I had attended a conference. It was a banking conference. And I remember looking around the room and realizing that there was no one, well, there were very few individuals that looked like me, being that there were no women. And there were certainly no young women at the conference. And so, just having this background of wanting to be a banker my whole life, and I thought, what is this message that we're sending to young women? Here I am coming, to this conference as a career banker, and not seeing any other women there. So are we not telling women they can come to these conferences? Are there just no women to come to the conferences? And then what does this look like for the future of women in banking? And so that opened the door to, I was sitting with my friend Allison at another conference, and we were in the back of the room, and we should have been paying attention to the speaker, but instead we were brainstorming, and the Girl Banker was kind of born at that moment, because it just kind of hit me, there is a need for advocacy for women in this industry. And so that's kind of where the Girl Banker was born. The name the Girl Banker came from a play on girl boss, which is funny because now that's kind of a taboo phrase, or viewed that way. But I look at it as is that it's a way to speak to young women specifically. And so regardless if you're a veteran woman in banking or you're a young girl in high school that's just considering a career in this industry, hopefully that name, speaks to you and makes you realize that there's a community of women in banking to support you and advocate for you along the way. So that's where it was born, and it started as a blog and developed into a strong social presence. The podcast I have, I'll be honest, my banking career is first and foremost. Without the banking career, I'm just the girl, not the girl banker. And so I think that the podcast is something that I just get to when I can. But speaking engagements came along, and I think I realized that it was really making an impact. There were a couple of milestones, and really, I think just having the opportunity to go speak at women at banking conferences and realizing that there is that community out there was a big aha moment. But I had started a Facebook group really as a means to, it was just something that Facebook, if you had a profile page, they were really pushing you to have a separate group that's more of a private group for members of your, the people that follow you on Facebook. And so I thought, oh, okay, I'll just do this, and didn't really think that it would turn into much. But I realized specifically in 2020, when the world stopped, the impact of this group. So the group had started with around 300 women, just that had joined, and they were sharing questions they had, and it was really, you have to be a woman in banking in the United States to be a member of this group, and I'm the admin and allow people in and all those things. But as March 2020 rolls around, which is pretty crazy to think that that was 5 years ago this week, or I believe, that suddenly all these women had decided, oh my goodness, there's so much happening that it specifically affects us as women in banking. One, how is your branch handling a shutdown? Are you closing branches? Where are you getting your masks? Where are you getting your plexiglass for your teller lines? Are you just opening your drive-through? How are you handling a quarantine? All these things started happening, and young, or not young, but women in general that were trying to manage their kids that had been sent home from school. Are you working remotely? What is your bank's policy about that? And so all these women started flooding this group with these questions. And now, as of today, I think the group is knocking on the door of, or possibly has surpassed 11,000 women from across the country. And in that group, there's so much great wisdom that is shared, a lot of great questions, whether it be policies, procedures. I don't allow vendors in there. So there's a lot of great questions about, hey, I'm looking at this vendor or implementing this at my bank. Does anyone have experience with that? Or even, hey, I'm looking to relocate, or hey, we have these job opportunities. I mean, there's just really no cap on the amount of information that is shared between women in this safe, free space for women in banking. And so I think that group has really been and will continue to be the lasting impact, because as I mentioned, I have this banking career, and so there's times when I can give it a lot of love and energy, and there's times when I can't. And that group just kind of thrives and lives on its own, which is to me both the greatest gift that I've been able to give to women in banking, and then I feel that I've received that gift as well.
Yeah, so I'm actually a member of the Girl Banker group on Facebook. So
Great.
I'm one of the 11,000, but I can absolutely relate
Good.
to what you said about looking around and realizing most of the room does not look like you. I have that experience often as well as a woman in banking. And, to the men's credit, there are some rooms where I don't notice that as much and I feel welcome. And there are other rooms where by no one's fault really you just notice.
Mhm.
So while we've made I think some great strides, banking can still feel very male dominated, as you said.
Yes.
So what are some of the biggest challenges that you see for women in banking?
I think that could be a loaded question, and then I would agree with you that we have made strides. I do think that we've made some steps forward, and we have to be very careful to not take steps backward. I feel that, women deserve a seat at the table. And I feel that that starts at the very top. And so if your board of directors does not reflect that, it's tough to ever see an opportunity for your C suite to reflect that. And if the C suite doesn't reflect that, then how does middle management look? And then so on. And so, when there's women that have a seat at the table and have influence, that's when different policies can change to where it's more welcoming to women, whether it be through childcare, maternity leave, nursing stations, things in the office, all those different things. Women have different phases of life that they're dealing with, and anytime we can create those policies to make it more of a welcoming workspace for them, the better off that we all are. Because I honestly feel that better decisions are made when there's multiple perspectives at that table and have that influence. And so I think that's where we still have room to grow. One of the other questions I always ask whenever I'm on stage is, are you happy with representation of women at the board level? And it's very rare that I see a lot of happy women about that. And I know that that's hard to change. And that seems to be difficult when women are like, well, yes, but what can I do about that? I think that's where it just takes, if you are a woman of influence in your organization and you are at a higher level, then you've got to be pushing and encouraging that opportunity to diversify those seats. And so if anything, that's the glaring opportunity, I think, for improvement for women in our industry.
Yeah, I would agree. Sorry for the loaded question. I can't guarantee
Yeah,
there will
no,
not
it's
be more.
it's a great question and it's an important question. And I'm glad that you asked it because if that's one thing that I constantly think about with this platform is that I don't want it just to be a space where I'm just pushing fun content on Instagram or ooey gooey messages about taking care of yourself and self-care. I mean, there's a need to advocate for change and to support
Mhm.
women. And for example, I think that it's beyond, and I think this is really even a bigger conversation. It should be beyond just diversifying seats at the table in terms of women. I mean, there should be people of color represented as well. We should definitely
Mhm.
reflect the communities that we serve. And so that advocacy is so important, and definitely our industry could do much better in that arena.
Preach. Yeah. So you're right. There's a lot of, advocacy to be done. And, unfortunately, I don't think we can wait on, people who, I want to be careful how I say this. It's ultimately going to fall to us to advocate for ourselves
Absolutely.
because,
Hmm.
if you don't do it, you can't wait on someone else necessarily to
Right.
advocate for you always. So what steps can women take to establish themselves as leaders in a traditionally male dominated industry? Do you think that looks, different than how male leaders operate, or can we kind of I mean, I don't think the same paths and patterns are always going to work for us. Am I
Right.
right on that?
Right. I think so. And I think you're so right in that we can't just sit around and wait for someone to do it for us. I think if you look historically, this last weekend was International Women's History Month, and if you look historically at how change for women has taken place, it's not because some white man has sat down and said we've got to make it better for women. It's been because women have taken to the streets and have demanded change. And I think, God love it, we are in the thralls of continuing to do that. And so I think, in fact, the name of the speaking engagements I do, the name of my presentation is "It's Up to Us." And why it's so important for women to advocate for one another. And there's a lot of steps. I mean, I think a couple of things that I would first mention is that it's funny that people always say, and first and foremost, I am not a hater of men. I need to make that very clear. I have two young boys, 14 and 8, and a wonderful husband, and I value them and appreciate them, and I'm doing my best to raise them to value women and roles like this, and hopefully they see my influence and appreciate that and will be an advocate themselves someday. But it takes women to support one another. And it's funny because I hear these stories about how specifically a woman that may have broken the glass ceiling in their organization, but they were the only woman. And, maybe they were in the right place at the right time and they did the work, but they aren't a supporter of bringing women up behind them. You see those images on Instagram of the hands extended down and pulling other women up the ladder behind you. Sometimes in our industry, you see these women that I refer to them in my speaking engagements as queen bees. They get to those roles and they feel threatened when other women are knocking on the door. And the reason they feel threatened is because of how hard it was for them to get there to begin with. And instead of seeing that as an opportunity to extend that hand downward and to bring others up by advocating for change in policies and realizing that they were walking so others could run, they may instead push back. And so first and foremost is recognizing that we got to break that cycle. We have to have women in these spaces to advocate for others, for promotions, for hires, advocacy for increasing salaries and advocating for pay. One of the things I hear sometimes is that these women will say, "Oh, I was only paid this when I started, so that's what so and so should be paid." Well, that's not the case. Times have changed, inflation, etc. There are reasons to advocate for better pay for women, and so again, I kind of go back to, if you are a woman in a role of leadership, it is truly up to you to advocate for the other women around you. And if you have that seat at the table, use that voice. And I know that's easier said than done sometimes because there's all the cliche things that we hear about how a woman can have an opinion, but they're viewed as bossy. And I get that. So it takes allies that are male as well. I'm very fortunate that I feel that I've had a lot of male allies over the years. I'm very fortunate that I'm in a bank now where women are valued and are in leadership. We have a great women's mentorship program. There are a lot of strong women that helped start this bank, and so they're still here and still advocates for other women. So I feel very, very, very lucky in that. But not all women are lucky in that. And I think too that there's something to be said, and I don't know, I may be criticized for saying this. If you are a woman and you are in an organization that is not supporting you, is not advocating for you, and is not ever going to, then go find a place that will. There are a lot of great banks out there. There are a lot of great opportunities that and skill sets that you learn in banking, and do everything you can to make yourself marketable, and sell yourself. And remember that you can't wait for someone else to do it. And if you can tell that path's not happening for you, go make your path. I'll be honest and say that I kind of did the same thing. If I had sat back and waited, I'll never forget. And I do respect this gentleman, but I don't respect what he said to me on this specific day. He said, "Natalie, if you'll just wait, we've got this great opportunity for you. And if you'll just wait, and not leave and go to this other bank that was offering more money and a promotion, that time will come." And I'm here to tell you that if I had waited, I probably would still be waiting today. And that's been 13 years later. So don't be afraid to market yourself and advocate for yourself while you're advocating for other women in banking, because you are 100% right. If we sit back and wait for it to happen, it's not going to. I'm very passionate about that topic, so thank you for asking that question.
No, absolutely. I'm glad to have heard your soapbox on that because it sounds like we share it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with everything you said. So I'm going to kind of drill down now and ask about some specific, issues that tend to come up for women in banking. And I know they're not always specific to women, but on average, they're, things that tend to come up when we talk about women in banking. I think when you're in a room where a lot of people don't look like you, it's easy to kind of struggle with imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Do I deserve this seat at the table, and kind of struggling to step into that. So how can women in banking specifically, women who have earned those leadership roles or hope to earn those leadership roles, how do you kind of combat that self-doubt and build confidence in that role?
Sure. I think that having a strong ally and friend, or someone that can be a mentor to you is numero uno. It's so important. I mentioned my friend Allison earlier. She has been that for me, multiple times. She has helped to prep me, role play with me to make sure that I'm ready for certain conversations where I had to advocate for myself or request a raise because I was being asked to do more. Having someone that helps to urge you and push you and hold you accountable, I guess, is so important because there's a lot of stats out there about how women have to be told by friends or encouraged by friends or coworkers multiple times to ask for a raise or for a promotion, whereas men just put their name in the hat. They don't think twice about it. So having that advocate for you is always great, and finding that person that can be a good mentor and help to build you up is really, really important. You know, I would say that another thing that women need to consider, especially if they're in a level of leadership, if they are the only woman in the room, they should never be the one getting the coffee or taking the notes, especially if they are of equal level to the other men in the room. So if they're a C-suite person, but they're the only female, that does not equal note taker. And so kind of establishing those boundaries, and that can feel super awkward and weird, but the earlier you do that and set that standard, the better off you are. Because if you just kind of fall into a habit of doing it, then they're going to expect that from you. So you do have to kind of stand up for yourself. I think always being willing to educate yourself and learn, and invest in yourself, whether that be through further, webinars, seminars, education, outside the bank, conferences, things of that nature. But more importantly, investing in yourself through self-care and recognizing that you don't have to work twice as hard, even though it may seem like it. And so making sure you're getting good rest and eating well and taking care of you, helps to make you a better you. And that could be a whole other podcast. I know I've mentioned my friend Allison a few times. She has a platform called Reject the Hustle that I would urge everyone to go look at. And it's all about this mentality that sometimes saying no is the best yes. And there's a lot that women can learn from that, especially as we're juggling all the things, that we don't have to be everything to everybody. But then at the end of the day is just recognizing the value that you have. I've had this conversation several times in the last several weeks that sometimes it's very easy to feel that the value that we have and our worth as a banker is only because the bank that we're at gives us that. And that's not to say that I'm not, I mean, I value all the banks I've worked at and I've learned a lot from all of them. But at the end of the day, we have to know that we have earned those positions. We have those skill sets because we've invested in ourselves. And yes, we can give appreciation where appreciation is due, but our value is within us and not given to us by someone else. And so recognizing that is very powerful. And recognizing that gives you a lot of confidence in just knowing, hey, I earned my right to be here. I deserve to be here. And I deserve to be valued by this organization. So, it's I think also knowing that it's a marathon, not a sprint, and that things like this don't happen overnight. Gaining this confidence, if you don't already have that, it takes a bit to get there. But again, that's where the advocacy and support for one another comes from. So if you're a woman in a position where you feel that way and you have that confidence, do what you can to mentor those below you to where they feel that as well. And I think, again, together that we can do that because it is up to us, as you said earlier.
That's good. That's so good. So I don't enjoy the fact that this is kind of a standard women in banking question, but it is because, women do still tend to statistically take on a lot of, housework and childcare, even
Mhm.
when they're also working. And banking can be really demanding,
Yeah.
especially if you're in a leadership role. So, what advice do you give women for balancing, career and then, there's family obligations and personal growth and all the things when it just kind of seems like there's not enough hours in the day?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm saying this coming off of my boys playing 10 baseball games over the last 2 days. and freezing. So I'm sitting here with bags under my eyes, extremely tired. I call it the Monday morning baseball hangover. If you have travel ball kids, you get what I'm saying. And so I lead into saying that I'm sitting here already very drained, and it's Monday morning after a time change. So I get that, and I feel that in my bones. I would first say this. If you spend a lot of energy and time worried about getting your life balanced, then you're never I think you're setting yourself up for failure. And I'm not knocking your question, because your question is great, but I do think that women tend to put this extra pressure on themselves that, oh my gosh, I don't have a perfectly balanced work-life balance. I'm imbalanced. And I am just here to say that that is okay. That is okay. And that, when you look around your office, and hopefully there are women there, and you look at each of the women, you realize we're all in different phases of life. And each phase of life requires leaning into different things. And so I just really feel the phrase work life balance and the pressure to be balanced is just a very patriarchal corporate thing that was created to make everyone's HR look good, that they are trying to advocate for this work life balance, when in fact I think it just adds one more thing for women to have to check off their box, or check a box. And so I say that if you are in a phase of life where you have young kids and you're trying to climb the ladder, you're trying to do this, take a deep breath and recognize that we are given this one life, and lean into what you are able to lean into. If it is more family, then lean the hell in. If it needs to be work, then lean in there too, or when you can. And I will first say to you that I have an immense amount of privilege of having a very, very wonderful husband that is not just a husband, but a partner in raising our kids. And that has allowed me and enabled me to do what I've done career wise. And I know not everyone has that. And so, finding a way to lean into where you need to be and what makes you feel the best is most important, because as soon as your kids are growing and you look around your office and you may see a woman that's in another phase of life where she's no longer dealing with raising kids, but she's dealing with aging parents. And it's like this circle, that we get stuck in, and then you look back and you're like, well, where did I focus on me? Because I was constantly focused on someone else. But just recognizing that there are these different phases, and that there are these different times to, be more, you may feel more balanced family wise or more balanced career wise. And then that is okay, because it is a different journey for everyone. And of course, anytime you can find an organization, a bank that helps you to lean in appropriately, the better you are. And I think it's really important that we as women are selective about what that looks like when we can be, so that we can take care of ourselves, take care of our families, and take care of our careers the best that we can. So long answer to your question is, I don't think there's a perfect balance, and I've yet to find someone who is. But just recognize that there's, phases of life, and it changes daily, and just, appreciate that phase for what it is and lean in where you can.
That is such a good and freeing answer, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a trap, when you think of it as, oh my gosh, I'm not balanced. And then that person appears to be so put together and has her life together, when behind the makeup and the cute outfit, it may be, and good Instagram, it may be, falling apart. So like everybody's dealing with this, and recognizing that too is very freeing.
Absolutely. Um, we talked a little bit about, actually, I feel like we talked a lot about, being in rooms where, maybe you're the only woman or one of very few women. And, I think that can be challenging, not just in, your own bank when that's the case, but in, networking situations. I feel like that's something that I've seen a lot when you're, one of maybe one or two or three women, trying to network with a room full of men. And I don't think they always realize that there's an element of challenge there
Hmm.
for women when you are the only one. So, what are some of your best networking strategies for women looking to grow in their banking careers?
I think I can speak to what has worked for me. Is and this kind of goes back to the phases of life too. There was a phase early on where it was kind of when I had transitioned out of being at one bank in a very loan heavy role into a role where I was in bank marketing. And during that time, I had transitioned from being very, very close to the office from my home to then having an hour commute. But doing that really pushed me out of my comfort zone. And suddenly I was thrust into an area where there were so many nonprofits to be involved in an event every night and to do all these things and young leader groups and all this kind of stuff. And so I tried to pick as many things as I could, pour myself into them, and in doing that, I met a lot of different people. And I also would be sure to connect with them on LinkedIn or on social in some capacity, and that helped to kind of stay connected and stay present in front of them. And I also found though that as time went on, I could do more with less. I didn't have to be at every event. I didn't have to go and be gone every night doing something because I had built that network. But I think being extremely intentional on where you need to be, when you need to be there, and then having an appropriate follow through that matches your role and your personality is key. And if you can get a buddy that can go with you to help you build your confidence, that helps as well, or somebody that's at work that can help make some introductions, that's always helpful as well. But a lot of the networking I have done has ultimately been on social. Um, and I think it's important to note sometimes that digital relationships are relationships. And so that piece of networking can be really key. And then the main thing is that if you do meet these people in person, that it reflect your personality and authenticity matches what they've seen online. Because that's the thing that can be really awkward is if you have this personality online and then suddenly you meet in real life and it doesn't match. And I worked for people like this before. That's not the kind of vibe to put forward. But I think just finding something that works for you in your comfort zone pushes you a little bit outside your box and that you have that appropriate follow through later, but also recognizing too that molds and changes along with these phases of life that you're in. I mean, I definitely now I'm not gone every night to some event. I mean, I am very selective of where I spend my time and make sure that when I do spend my time somewhere, that it is very effective for me or the bank. And if early on you have to kind of run hard so that you can be more intentional later, then do that. But I think it's real important to not try to be everything to everybody too, and recognize what type of networking works best, and count and maximizing that. I always encourage women that are going to these women in banking conferences. Don't just get comfortable with the people at your table that you came with. Make sure you're connecting with others, so that if you were to need a reference on a vendor later, or if you're looking for another job or relocating, or you're looking to hire, you've made these connections down the road, and then you follow through by connecting with them online. So that's something that works different for everyone. And I may have been all over the place with that answer, but I just know that my experience in that has definitely evolved through the different phases of my career that I've been in, and just finding something that works for you is important there.
No, I think that was a lot of great insight, so I appreciate the wide-ranging answer. Um, yeah, you definitely have to find what works for you because it's gonna be different for everyone. So, I have
Mhm.
one final question before I let you off the hook, and that is, are there any professional development resources or programs you recommend for women in banking who want to level up their careers?
That's another really good question. You've had lots of great questions today. I wish there were more targeted women in banking resources. And it's interesting because and I wish that I had the time to put some time into this, specifically as it evolves around pay. There's been a lot of push in the Girl Banker group to do, a compensation study. I've kind of talked to a couple of banking associations on what that would look like, and it's a heavy lift. And one, unfortunately, I don't have the personal tools and resources to do. But I wish, if anyone's listening and is interested in partnering on something like that, there's a need for women to have access to that, to know where we stand and what should be, a typical pay structure for certain roles that women in banking are in. And so that's one thing I wish that existed that I'm not sure it does. But the first thing that comes to mind that I know that I'm a big advocate for is a graduate school of banking. And the six national graduate schools of banking, and I've covered some of these on my podcast, and I'm a big advocate for Graduate School of Banking Colorado because that's where I go, and I went, and I'm on the faculty there. But those schools are a 3-year program, and you attend them for 2 weeks in the summer. So it's kind of like going back to college of sorts, and it's very bizarre, especially for a woman that's got kids at home, and to just leave for 2 weeks and go back to college. It's kind of a unique experience. But I will say one that was incredibly impactful on my career, both from all the things we've talked about, from networking to advocacy to just overall knowledge. Knowledge is power. And I'm extremely grateful for the opportunity to have attended graduate school of banking Colorado, and that's been years ago that I went. But there need to be more women that are putting themselves through that, because, and I'm excited to see that, especially the six national schools are starting to really, you're starting to see a big increase in women attendees, whereas before it was very predominantly male. And so there are some that have probably more resources than others to try to make it better for women to attend. But for example, I like to share this story, probably because it's insane. But my two boys are 6 years apart because I was attending graduate school of banking in the middle of that. My oldest was 3 years old when I attended. He's 14 now. He was 3 years old. He was 6 when I graduated. And I knew from attending, and there were women there that attended that were either pregnant or had to quit because they had a baby. Because it's not exactly easy to just take off and go to go back to college for 2 weeks whenever you have an infant at home. So I was able to family plan around that, and that's why my oldest, my youngest came along 6 years later. So all that to be said, it does take some planning and some work with your family and with your bank to make it happen. But it is extremely impactful to you to go and to learn from the ground up how a bank works. And I feel that, I had been in banking for 12 years when I went to graduate school of banking. And I learned things there that I had never been exposed to. Now, I'd been in a bigger bank, and so that's, sometimes just part of that. But I felt so much more equipped to elevate my career in this industry after attending a GSBC. And so I would definitely encourage women to be looking at those opportunities of what is the best fit for them, what may work both logistically and time wise, with where they are in their career, where they are with their family, and what that looks like for them. There are scholarships available that you can get from state associations to attend those. And so that can maybe help you sell that to your boss of what that looks like for you. And you're starting to see more roles present. Used to, it was just commercial lenders were attending these. Well, now you see a little bit of everything. You see people in HR, you see people in IT, you see people, on the credit side, you see people in marketing. And it's really great to see that diversified and these schools kind of stepping up to the plate. And then lastly, I would say that, anytime there are opportunities, whether they're webinars or conferences, um, be selective on what you're attending, and recognizing that networking is always a huge, huge thing of when you're attending something in person. So maximize the heck out of those opportunities to go to those conferences and listen to all the things, take all the notes, and meet all the people, because those are usually where all the good magic happens. But I will end with saying that there's probably not enough resources for women in banking. The Girl Banker group may be a good one to throw out here because it's a free resource where there's a great opportunity to connect and learn from each other in there, and get good insights from people that are, they don't have anything to sell to you. They literally just want to help. And so I hope that community can continue to thrive and be really a good resource for women, because I think just in answering this question, I'm realizing there's just not quite enough.
Yeah, for sure. But I think of what's out there, you've given a really good rundown of things for women in banking to check out and some really good places to start. So thank you so much for that. And
Yeah.
thank you for coming on today. I think this was a really great conversation. I hope, every, woman who listens to the podcast gets something out of it. And I hope that men are able to listen too, because I think most of them do understand that, on some level, we face challenges that they don't, and they want to be part of the solution. And I hope maybe they will hear ways that they can start to do that. So thank you so much for
Yes.
just coming on here and sharing.
Well, thank you, Madison, and I really appreciate the opportunity. And I'll say too, I know you were patient in getting me on here. It's been kind of a wild month. We just had a big grand opening for my new branch in Northwest Arkansas last week, and we throw a big party here at First Community Bank. So I'm excited to have had that and got it over with. But I appreciate you being patient with getting me on here. It's been a good conversation today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Correspondent Podcast from Independent Correspondent Bankers Bank. We hope you've heard something that you can take back to your community bank. Be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating and review, or on Spotify, turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upload. See you next time, community bankers.